Good morning, everybody. I'm Doug McDade. My co-host, Shaun McDade, my nephew, is on the road today. I'm hoping that he'll join us by phone, but I'm really glad you're here. We are just a couple of guys that kind of work our daily routine uh, by starting with God first and walking with Jesus. And we're not self-proclaimed righteous teachers of faith. We just thought that based on talks with other people, we found a lot of people kind of struggle the way we struggle, and thought, let's do it all together. And so hopefully Shaun jumps on here soon. He's not sure if he can make it or not, but yeah, we just kind of look at faith, start every day walking with Jesus, and kind of fumble and stumble our way through the biblical passages and daily devotions. And one of the things that we've been talking about recently is how God treats us fairly and gives us blessings. And the closer we get to Him, the bigger the blessings are and the more amazing they are. And you begin to see the miracle of God's work. And like I said, we're just a couple of guys that discovered what God does for us, and we want to share it in order to help you and enlighten you, and hopefully charge you with the electricity that we feel from Jesus. We were kind of talking about how God uses disasters, and Shaun wanted me to share this particular verse with you. So I got to read it. So Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians see you today. You will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." And we hear a lot about, I think it's, I'm not sure what psalm it is. Psalm I have to look it up, but it's real popular. And Sean's strength is he knows the chapters and the verses by name and number. I do not. I just remember the thought and the feeling I get. But there's a popular psalm that says, "Just be still and know that I am God." And this one kind of speaks to the same thing. I'll read it again. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." And that's Exodus 14, verses 13 and 14. So I don't talk about it a lot. I kind of hint about it, but a year ago, well, 11 months ago, uh, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And of course, when your doctor tells you have cancer, your whole world goes numb and your vision goes blurred, and you freak out. And I was going through a tough time at that time. And I, uh, I just knew I wasn't going to make it. I had in my head that I'd already had one foot in the grave, as my daughter-in-law said. I didn't believe I'd make it past October or November, this past uh, October or November. And I did. And the reason I did is because I was listening to the wrong voice. And when I hear this verse, I'm going to read it again because, our whole gig is to, break down what we read and try to make sense of it. And so Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. And so here, what I make of this, and hopefully Sean jumps on pretty soon, but what I make of this is, in this case, Egyptians, I don't want to call them evil, but they kept uh, the nation of Israel, the Israelites, they were referred to back then, captive and enslaved. And so um, that's not a good thing. God, believe it or not, I've got some discussions about how, God is evil because he permits slavery. Well, he doesn't permit slavery. He doesn't like slavery. And, maybe that's another topic for another time. But I've done some talks on that about how he doesn't like slavery. And so anything that separates you from God is sin. And sin is evil. And so I am going to cautiously just suggest that because the Egyptians are keeping the Israelites enslaved back in this time, that there's a sense of evil there. Um, and the Bible talks about there are certain rules that you should do when you have slaves, if you're going to have slaves. And the idea is hopefully you get to a point where you don't have slaves. And that gets into a whole nother discussion about free will. But in terms of the Lord, Moses answered to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord. And you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." So, all right. So this was 4, 5, 6,000 years ago. And so in this case, Egypt was enslaving the Israelites. And we kind of suggest cautiously that that's kind of a sin. It's kind of evil. And Moses told them, "Don't be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." And this is how God, what is amazing, the more you work through the Bible and break it down like this, line by line, maybe even word by word, we begin to see how God truly works. And I've mentioned on this show many times that my personal, and I encourage this for you too, and if there's a way we can help you, let us know in the comments below. But I encourage you to find a Bible verse that means something to you and helps you feel like you're moving forward in your walk with Jesus. And mine was Revelation 3:19 or 3, no, I forgot, 3:19, 3:20. And it's, "Behold, I stand at the door and I knock. Whoever opens the door and or hears my voice and lets me in, we will feast and we will party and we will have a great time." And that was that described perfectly what happened to me when I decided to surrender to Jesus. Surrender is a funny word for people, and certainly for me when I was uh, began my walk in faith, because it sounds like we're being submissive, and in a way we are, but we don't become submissive when we do it. Uh, just like it says here, "Don't be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." And that's what happened to me when I checked in on Revelations 3:19 and 3:20. When I decided to let Jesus in the door, um, I saw the deliverance that the Lord brought me that day. And, of course, what we want to do is we want to open that door every day and every morning and let Jesus in. And so just because it talks about the Egyptians 4,000 years ago, how many ever years ago it was, uh, it's still the same point. God is there. And I have Shaun on, I believe. Shaun, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
All right. Welcome, buddy. How's the road today?
Cold, but the sun's coming up through the clouds and looks pretty cool, so that's a positive.
Yeah. Yeah, good. I know it's freezing here. It's like five above or something. Oh no, it's made it up to 8 degrees. Um, so I was just kind of chatting with everybody about how I began with Exodus 14, verses 13 and 14, and trying to show the relevance of God's presence now as God was present. I believe it was 4,000 years ago, about the time of Moses's existence. And don't be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. And I kind of went over about how my diagnosis with prostate cancer, Satan was screaming at me and torturing me, and I had one foot in the grave. I didn't believe I was going to live past October or November of 2024. And when I was still, because it closes, the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. And I owe this a lot to my spiritual advisor at City of Hope Hospital. He said, just breathe Jesus in and blow Satan out, and do that, that exercise of breathing, but get that focus in your head that Jesus is there, and just be still and breathe Jesus in and blow Satan out. And you will see the Lord fight for you. And I did immediately, but it took me to be still, and it took me to have faith and trust in Jesus. And so I'm trying to draw the correlation between now, that experience for me, and that experience for the Israelites in Moses's time. Um, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, when that one, the end of the verse there, when he says, "Be still,"
Yeah.
it just really like it it's like, you know, Moses talks about the commandments, and in a way, that's a commandment. But again, it's more also God being asking for obedience, right? He's like, be still, like, I got this. And for me, that's where I really like, oh, I had to like take a second and meditate on that and realize that's how we find peace. That's how we find harmony. That's how, and when we do that, that simple, it also reminds me of Jesus when he's in the boat and he just says, calms the waters, and all the guys are like, "What? We have to freak out." He goes, "No, you don't have to freak out about anything. God's got this. Hi, Jesus got this." So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's kind of where you step in and listen to God's commands, and He will fight on your behalf. And kind of like I was talking about last week, I said I wasn't sure. Oh, does God, or you brought up, does God use disasters? And I don't know, how I feel about that 100% now. I don't know if it's just God's protection that prevents you from seeing those disasters. So I don't know if my doctrine or my theology was quite sound last week. Obviously, there's plenty of examples in the Old Testament where he does, and he commands his angels to go out. So God is in control of those things, but I guess I don't know that I phrased it correctly last week, where he causes them to happen. He knows they're going to happen, and if you listen to him, he'll protect you and he'll move you away from you.
Yeah, that's so true, and it's interesting that you brought up Bible verse in Scripture about Jesus in the boat, and the winds are ripping the boat apart, and then they're blown away about how Jesus rebukes the sea and it goes calm immediately, and the disciples go, "Wow, what man can do this? He must be the Son of God." And I may be misquoting that. I apologize. But in those instances, and what I learned from my journey is the seas did get calm. And one of the things that I learned, and that verse is perfect that you spoke about, because um, Jesus is always with us. He was right there in the boat with these guys when the boat was bouncing all over the place and being tossed to and fro by the storm. Jesus was with them. And that's what I found out in my when I got my diagnosis, and that Jesus was with me, and he told me to trust me, or he told me to trust him. And then when you go back 4,000 years ago, don't be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. And that's every day. So when you talk about natural disasters, we have to level up. I don't know how else to explain it, but I'm leveled up now. And so when tragedy occurs, the first thing that should come to your mind is God's got this. We just have to be still, stand firm in our faith, and listen, and we will get the guidance we need. And what jumps into mind is a lot of people, the naysayers will go, well, that's really convenient. And what about the people who died? We don't know. And I said to Sean one time, kind of frivolously, I said, it's none of our business what happens to others. It's our journey, what happens to us. I don't know if you take exception with that, Sean, or not.
I mean, it it is our journey, but we also like we're not meant to know what our time is. That's where I'm being brought to think of this. Like we don't know when our time to go is. We don't know someone else's time to go is. We don't know when it's Jesus' time to come back. So we don't know what God's plan was. There's part of me that as I'm thinking and going through things, there's there's other missions beyond this earth. I don't know if when you die you become an angel or if it's a transition or if your spirit comes back. But there's God knows the time when He's preparing to bring you up to be in heaven with Him. So, because I feel, there's certain times, there's certain people that leave the earth. They know it's their time because they have a different spiritual mission. They have to go to the spirit realm to find somebody to bring something back to one of their loved ones. Like I feel like our ancestors are kind of always working within our lives and are preparing and finding different things that they want to see to either protect us from or to bring us into.
Yeah.
So I know that's kind of going a little bit off of the main tangent, but I think, yeah, we that's where I'm brought us. We don't really know. It's our journey. We don't know what someone else's journey is. We don't know when it was their time. We don't see what God had prepared for their story or their family story. But we do know He says He works all things for good. So you just, like you said earlier, you have to be still and trust Him. If it's
Yeah.
not good, it's not over yet. There's still something that can come of it.
And that's what I meant when I said I feel we just have to level up. When instead of becoming fearful in times of tragedy and natural disasters, if you will, uh, we have to rise above them. And the only way we can do that is be still. If we're frantic and oh my gosh, tornadoes coming, blah, 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 we're going to miss something, and we're not going to be protected. And so I think about, and I don't mean to be morose here, and I don't want to bring everybody down because it is a sun's shining here now too. It's a beautiful day. But I can remember when my father was very, very ill. And when he was, the doctors called mom and said, okay, well, it looks like he doesn't have long to live. Um, he was kind of fighting it. And I remember mom said, uh, Mac, it's okay. You can go. It's okay. And then he kind of relaxed and he did pass. And and so when we don't know where our journey, transitions, but um, there's a sense of fighting everything. And when we're still, whatever that transition is, we're able to move through it or move above it much easier. And that's what I mean when I say level up. Does that make sense?
Yeah. In a way, it's like transcending. You're going, like you say, above and becoming better. And one thing that I know, I'm thinking is probable. If you wouldn't have had that peace and that stillness, you would have been wasting energy on negative thoughts. You would have been wasting energy on correcting negative thoughts, which would have hurt your recovery and your ability to defeat the real fight that you were against.
Right.
Right? It wouldn't have been a fight of the mind. It would have, and you wouldn't have been consuming unnecessary energy and expending unnecessary energy into a place that would have been harmful, right? So God brought you to that right point at that right time of acceptance and in a way deliverance that you could transcend above it and you could realize, all right, no, I have to rely on God. God's got this. God's got my back. He's going to show up for me.
Yeah, yeah. That's exactly what I went through. Absolutely. Uh, and like I said, when I first, when I first got the news of my condition, I heard this loud voice yelling at me, and it was taunting me and making fun of me. You're gonna die, and there's nothing you can do about it. Ha 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 ha. It was pretty incredible. It was a really dark time for me. And uh, then I realized when I was still. I could hear the stillness of God. I could feel the stillness of Jesus embracing me and stepping me up out of that darkness and that negativity and that confusion. And so this verse is wonderful. The Lord will fight for you. You you need only to be still. And I'm laughing because when I said, "Okay, Jesus, this is your fight," it was like he took my hand. I said earlier before you got on, I said, I felt like I had one foot in the grave and my second foot, my other foot was sliding in. And at that moment, Jesus just kind of picked me up and stepped me up out of that into, you know, love and sunshine and beauty. And I
Yeah,
know that sounds geeky to everybody, but I don't know how else to explain it except that I was lifted up. And we hear that all
right.
the time, and when we're still, then we recognize the still voice of the Lord. And
Yeah. And I kind of want to touch on that quick because it's when God's voice is that still and calming voice. It's not the condemning, shaming, telling you you're going to die voice. That wouldn't come from him,
yeah,
right? And one thing I've been really been striking me as I read Moses had said it, and I believe Abraham and maybe even Israel himself. But when God calls to them, they would say God called to him, and they would always respond, "Here I am,"
yeah,
right?
yep,
Right
yeah,
here I am. So it's this conversation that you're like, yes, God, here I'm hearing you. I am right here. Um, and in a way, we can also it's also a confirmation of here myself I am, but you can also break it down and put a comma in there and say here I am, because God is I am. He is the I am Almighty, right? So it's a way of saying, like, I am here, you are I am. You're also saying, here I am, you know where to find me.
mhm,
And so I think that's where, once we get to a place of being still, you find a still place where you can meet God, you can hear his voice more clearly, you can respond to him. And I really love saying that, whether it's audibly or by myself, is saying, here I am, like there's that proclamation of like, no, and this is where I am. This is what I'm choosing. Come find me and be with me.
yeah, yeah. And it's an acknowledgement and a recognition, God, that I am present with you. And when you said that, it reminded me, and I talked about this before you got on about how this is so close to my personal verse, Revelation 3:20. Behold, I knock at the door. Whoever hears my voice and opens the door and lets me in, we will we will go party. We will feast and have a great time. And opening that door is saying, here I am.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah.
I recognize your voice. What may I do for you? You know?
Yeah. It's answering the call and then inviting in that moment.
Yeah, yeah. So I didn't have a chance to read this article that you sent me. Um, let's see what happened to it. I just had it up here about you sent me an article. Does God use global crisis to judge the world? Did you read that article or were you just starting it?
I
Oh,
had read a little bit into it. I think the first paragraph it talks about something else, but then it goes into it went into, actually natural events, natural disasters, and it kind of broke down some verses in there. Again, forgive me, I'm driving, so I can't pull that up
yeah.
and recollect my brain onto where my exact thoughts were on that. I just wasn't sure that I had worded that last week correctly. So I was just giving us some more to chew on, especially from the New Testament, right? Because
Yeah.
we always there's the old covenants and old ways of working in the Old Testament, and then once Jesus came, a lot of things did change, and a lot of how God structured. And it's funny because like we think God is perfect and He had it all figured out from the beginning, but in some ways, I think God was learning how to interact with us and how to lead us in some ways. And so there was a growing up and maturation process of God as well, right? Like there's the promise of the rainbow that he will never flood the earth again. So like he does these things and then he realizes that they're no good anymore or they serve their purpose and he moves on and he transcends maybe into different and better things. Or it just could be that us as humans were in a place where we needed to grow and transcend. So the ways of old were serving us at the development we were at those stages. And then as we stair stepped up and as we grew up, he had to change his game plan to meet us more properly.
Yeah. I'm a little nervous about that. I believe God, the great I am, is omnipotent, all knowing, all present everywhere. Um, it's kind of as a parent, uh, you have to, you know, dribble breadcrumbs, so to speak, to seek the obedience of your children, and naturally, uh, we as earthly parents, we are learning, but I when we follow that process of, oh yeah, I can't. The baby has to crawl first before the baby can walk. The baby has to drink its mother's milk first before it can eat solid food. And so we learn that as earthly parents, but where do we learn that from? And it's God going, well, duh, you know. And so when one of the great awakenings for me was discovering that the Bible from beginning to end, and you and I haven't talked about this yet because so just so everybody knows, correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, you decided to start at the beginning of the Bible and work through Genesis and Exodus and work beyond, right? And
Yeah,
so
I think it was about February 1st or about the beginning because I had just been repetitiously going through Psalms, Proverbs, a little Isaiah, a little Jeremiah, and then the New Testament. I was like, man, since I have personally matured, I haven't gone back and started because Exodus and Deuteronomy and Kings, it's chewy. You got to chew and stew on it, and
yeah,
it's harder work to get through some of the messages that are in there because he has to lay so much a foundation. There has to be a foundation of the lineage and all of these things.
yeah,
So I was like, man, I really should go back and start from the beginning as I've grown, as I've matured. So yeah, I started back um, right at the beginning at Genesis and worked my way from there.
yeah. And so one of the great awakenings for me was realizing that the whole book of the Bible is building and supporting and telling the story of Jesus. And I don't know if you and I talked about that, but it'd be interesting for you to start working Jesus into your reading now, because the book, in fact, is not Old Testament for the Israelites and New Testament for Gentiles. And I don't even know if that's right to say that. See how we work through this, you guys? See? And but it's the story of Jesus's life, and then God sort of passes out the breadcrumbs I was talking about, reveals, does little reveals, and we start to see major reveals by the time we get to Isaiah. When Isaiah says, like one of the big things for me was when Isaiah says, not a, when the lamb comes, not a bone will be broken.
Yeah.
And what has that got to do with Jesus? Well, when Jesus was crucified, he was the only one where they did not break his any bones in his body. Typically, in a crucifixion, they broke people's legs because the way they're suspended in a crucifix situation, um, that sounds weird. Where there's the way they're suspended on the cross, they're unable to breathe, and so it's a slow death and a horrible horrific death. And what they did is they broke people's legs because driving the spikes through the median nerves of the wrists and the feet uh, sent their body into shock. And as they were suffocating, they would try to push themselves up off of I think it's called the pedillum, that little footrest on the footrest. That's an odd thing to say. But that little foot piece on the cross to push themselves up so that they could breathe. And when they broke their legs, they couldn't do that. So they tossed and turned and and they didn't do that to Jesus. As far as I know, he's the only one they never did that to. And you go, wow, he talks about that. Isaiah talks about that, because
Yeah.
he
Eh,
was supposed to suffer more than any of us. Go ahead.
Well, and I think it's the Bible is as much a story of Jesus in predicting the Old Testament and the New Testament, but it's also a story about us in our, God talks about his kingdom, his people. He will leave his descendants. So it's as much a story of a promise to us as God's family and God's descendants. It's just the work of Jesus that makes it complete and makes it, God, Jesus is the pinnacle of it. But I don't want us to forget about ourselves and our generations and the generations that came before as being a part of that story as well. Like I
Yeah,
don't want, yeah,
I pretty much started with that saying, even though this verse that you gave to us, Exodus, what was it, 14? I lost it. Wait a minute. Exodus 14, verses 13 and 14, even though that was from Moses' time, which is around 4,000 years ago, we can insert ourselves into the story right there, by knowing that, and this is what you and I have talked about, which is so wondrous about God's word from beginning to end, is we are valued, we are pertinent to the story, and God's word doesn't change. And in our existence and in the existence of mankind. And so we are in that story, and it's applicable today. Everything that he says he is, he was, and will be is just rock solid truth. And so yeah, we are in that story. And I kind of I didn't go as deep as you just did, but I was trying to draw the correlation between.
yeah, no, yeah, I do remember you saying at the beginning. You said how we can apply this to our lives today from the old stories of
Yeah.
before, and how he is still working in every way for us, which is very true. Like, um, and just the way that our God sentences, our ways that different things, like again, like I had never recalled seeing or hearing that word pinion before, and then I found it a couple other times. I don't remember one or two other times. So it's just like this: God is still alive. He's still breathing life. He is present. He is as authoring a plan and mastering a plan for us that we are involved in.
Yeah. So one of the things I did in using the example of then and now for us in our present day is this verse talks about the Egyptians. And I told everybody, and so I'm just bouncing off of you, and so correct me if I'm wrong. I'm looking for a different thought on this, but I suggested that sin, is separation from God, and the Egyptians were separating the Israelites from God because they held them in bondage and enslaved them. And when they tried to get away, they were beaten and oftentimes killed for trying to escape. But they were trying to get. I don't know that they knew the word of God then, whatever word existed at that time, and Moses spoke of God, but the example was that I gave was we can kind of think that Egyptians were evil. And I don't know if I'm creating any kind of blasphemy here or not, but they were keeping the Israelites from being free. And and evil, you know, God does not like evil. We know that, right? It's pretty obvious. And God also says that, and you might know this Bible verse, says that whatever you do to cause others to sin or to keep others separated from me, I will rain down my fury on you in some way. And so I was trying to draw a correlation there that the sin and or the Satan, the evil one that I know, can be compared to what the Egyptians were doing. The evil that I know was trying to keep me from hearing God's voice, trying to keep me uh, restless instead of at rest, trying to keep me excited instead of still. And so,
Yeah, yeah, and they did. So the Egyptians were preventing them from worshiping God. Moses kept saying, "We need to go worship our people. We need to go in peace and do our practices that connect us to our God." And he was not. He was working them borderline to death. And when he found this out, he made them work harder. Oh, they want to go worship their God. Well, now they have to go collect their own they had to go get their own straw to make the mud bricks, and the
oh,
mud
right.
bricks are what so
Yeah.
he was punishing them and making them work even harder, which again made it more unfavorable to God, because God is like, no, I need to my people need rest. God himself needed rest, right? So he's saying you're not honoring, you're not protecting my people, so he stepped in and delivered them and eventually freed them.
Yeah, yeah. And when you work through that process in any tragedy, much like your health, your personal health, or a natural disaster, or something happens, you need to rise above that and understand what is happening. The storm is trying to distract you from God. And when you step into God's favor, I mean, we already have God's favor, but you step in and be still with God, then you're no longer distracted by the storm. You are able to focus on the here and now. And that's what God wants us. He wants us to live in the moment, be present in the moment, because when you are, it's just so, it's just, it's wonderful. And I don't even know how to explain it. And I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but I'm laughing because I feel it. I feel it so positively now. Um, and it's a wonderful lesson. And so you mentioned straw. When the Israelites were making bricks for uh, the Egyptians, one of the components to keep the brick or the clay together. I don't know what it was, clay or dirt or
Uh,
something. It needed
yeah, it's
straw,
a
and
yeah,
then
it was a binding agent. It helped
yeah,
them bind
binding.
the
Right. And then they had to go forage for straw because they wouldn't, which slowed down their rate of production, which angered the Egyptians, and so it made it tougher for them. It's a little side note there. Um, but yeah,
I'm at my time, so if you want to continue, I will allow. I am going to step out. I got to go run into the shop and keep my day moving.
okay. All right, great. Well, I'm glad you were able to join us. It was really helpful. I'm just going to dig into this article a little bit and
Sure,
talk about it, and then I'll close up in a few minutes. So thanks, Sean.
sounds good.
And say
You're very
goodbye,
welcome.
Sean.
Bye. Love you guys. Thank
Love
you.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So Sean sent me this awesome uh, uh, article, and I know it's awesome because I kind of skimmed through it, but I didn't read it yet. I just didn't have the time because he sent it to me last night. But one of the things that's interesting, so again, the title of this is, Does God Use Global Crisis to Judge the World? You know, and we're in kind of a crisis in the world right now. And I don't mean to belittle or look down on the crisis and think it's nothing. Don't get me wrong. It's pretty serious, you know. And what we have to recognize in order for us to step up above it, to rise above it to the next level, is understand it's a distraction. We're in a spiritual war. And if you're a non believer, I can get how goofy that sounds to you. But if you just think about the evil that's around you, anything that distracts you from your personal goal. And what I encourage you to do is consider that Jesus is your personal goal. And those of you that are working or walking with Jesus now, that's your personal goal. It's my personal goal. And every day I get a little closer because we do these kinds of things daily. I open the door, I be still and let God work in me. And so when a natural disaster or you know natural disaster, I don't know what else to call it. When trouble comes your way, uh, this is some of the things that we have to learn how to rise above. And so in this article, I'm just going to start with this first section. And I wanted to do it while Sean was here, so I'm sorry I missed him. But I'm going to try to think like him and do some feedback here. But it starts out again, the name of it is Does God Use Crisis to Judge the World? And I don't see anything here that tells me who this is yet, so we'll try to give credit to them um, somewhere here. But it starts out, if God is love, and one of the things that interests me about how awesome this article is how it starts. I was a non-believer for many years, many years. I was a skeptic. I was a cynic. I was horrible. You know, I didn't believe in this what I thought was nonsense because I didn't know how to relate to it because I couldn't be still. I was anxious. You know, it's hard to be still, you know, and I don't want to take the time, but if we were just still for a minute, that was 10 seconds. Okay. Ah, that's scary to be still. So these are the thoughts that we have as non-believers. If God is love, you can almost, this is so well written, you can almost hear my cynical voice back from back then. If God is love, how can he permit tragedy and suffering in the world? You know, are natural disasters judgment? Why do bad things happen to good people? Oh, that's you hear that question all the time, and that's such a great argument. We think as non-believers on if there was a God, he wouldn't let bad things happen to good people, and that's where I kind of learned how to rise above that and go, well, that's none of that. That's none of my business. That's God's business with them. That's their business. And we don't know where God is speaking to them and where their transition is. But we learn from bad experiences. We do, especially if we're tied to God, we learn. And I don't believe God is testing us. And again, we're taking my belief of what I'm sharing with you for where I am on my personal journey with Jesus. But why do bad things happen to good people? You know, and it goes on. These questions and many others fill the minds of Christians and non Christians alike. How can we understand the nature of God as it relates to the reality of suffering we see in the world, as it relates to the realities of suffering we see in the world? And I know that in my storm, it was loud, it was crashing, it was terrifying. I was terrified, you know, and now I'm coming to find out that prostate cancer, a lot of people have it. You just don't hear about it much. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where somebody is on their journey. If they run across a tragedy or a disaster, it's terrifying until you find a way to be still and rise above it. And so this goes on. How can we understand the nature of God as it relates to the realities of suffering we see in the world? And so, what I imagine, knowing what I know now, having stepped out, and God, Jesus, be with me here and guide me on my words, but um, that's the spiritual warfare coming to life, a natural disaster or disorder or some sort of uh, horrific challenge, tragedy. Um, there was a lot of that when this is old news now for a lot of people because uh, it was 25 years ago or 24 years ago when the Twin Towers were hit. Um, and I know the horror I felt when those planes hit those towers because I forget what the population could have been, tens of thousands of people had they been in that building, in those two buildings. Tens of thousands of people would have died. And there were only, I don't know how many people in the building. And I'm going to say this sounds horrible to me, I know, so it's probably going to sound horrible to you, but we only lost 3,000 people. Now, if one of those people were a relative of yours, I'm dreadfully sorry. I don't mean to demean it by saying only, but when you feel the difference between the death of thousands, tens of thousands, um, to those that we did lose, I don't know where God was for them. We can't possibly know. It sounds horrific. It sounds as horrific as when I'm sitting on that clinical table and the doctors telling me that I had prostate cancer. um, I don't know that that terror is any different, and yet we hear the words as, and I believe they were said by Mr. Rogers, God is in the helpers, the people that came to help. I wanted to go help. My daughter and I ran to the nearest blood donation center to donate blood uh, for the people that were injured in that attack. So there were people coming. That was, I was in Chicago. That's in New York, but there were people coming from nationwide, even internationally, to help with that tragedy. And what caused them to do that? It was their nature to do that. Oh, listen to that word, nature. What is nature? Alexa, what does the word nature mean?
Nature is usually defined as the material world, especially as surrounding humankind and existing independently of human
Okay, I
activity.
can't hear her. I don't know if you can. I hear that you can hear her better than I can. But nature, we kind of relate nature to Mother Nature, to the experiences of this world. And God is not of this world. God is in this world. And we are in this world. And if we understand our nature, being in this world as opposed to being of this world, there are certain things in our nature that we do out of the goodness of our heart. And as followers of Jesus, or for me, I'll speak for me as a follower of Jesus, I want to be able to exhibit the fruits of the Spirit. I'm going to try and see if I can remember them. I don't know why it's so hard for me, but love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self control. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self control. Maybe we should do that and pick apart each one of those words. But it's in our nature. We just aren't open to it or don't allow ourselves to open to it. But in times of tragedy, people do. So what does it mean when Mr. Rogers, for those of you too young to know Mr. Rogers, he was a children's television um, guide for children. He was wonderful. He said, God is in the helpers. And so my nature to take my daughter, and she was only, bless her heart, 8 years old at the time, 7 or 8 years old, to go and donate blood. We both chickened out, by the way, which is horrible to say, but I have to be honest and transparent. Um, Neither one of us had given blood. Might have been too young for her to give blood, whatever age she was. Uh, but it was our nature to go there and do something. And we chickened out. We listened to the wrong voice, probably. But that nature of goodness, of faithfulness, of love, of joy, of peace, and patience, we want to strive to get all of those. And so when I say that I rose above or I leveled up above tragedies, I have a certain calmness about them, a certain peace about them. You know, with the uh, with the strife that's going on with the new election, and so many people are fearful. I'm above it. God's got it. I'm okay. I know somehow, like Shaun mentioned, you know, it's going to be uh, to our good and to the good for God. Uh, and that is, and I'm misquoting that. I do that a lot. I apologize. That's why I'm working here and being transparent and vulnerable in front of you. But Romans 8:28, just ask Siri. Hey Siri, show me Romans 8:28.
I can use ChatGPT to answer that.
No, I just want to search the web. I don't want to. Okay, Romans 8:28 says, and we know that in all things, and this is to Sean's point, and we know in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And it says, show more. This is about how God uses all things, including difficulties, to help people grow in faith and become more like Jesus. And so those tragedies, when we rise above them and be still and calm and collected in the fact that we know that God's got this, we somehow settle in the boat and know that God is in his fury fighting the tragedy or the disaster or the evil one. That's where I talked about the spiritual war. So to continue here, this writer writes, these questions and many others fill the minds of Christians and non-Christians alike. How do we understand the nature of God as it relates to the realities of suffering we see in the world? This writer says, my desire to answer questions was born out of watching well-known Christian leaders on TV. I'm kind of bothered about that, as they were interviewed about tragedies and disasters. To my amazement, they could not explain why God allowed bad things to happen. Um, the opportunity to reach millions of people with the revelation of God's character, nature, and love was lost. Okay. I gotta work through that. I'm not comfortable with what I just read. Why? Because I don't know that I understand it. I do know this brings to mind. I live right between Milwaukee and Chicago, and years ago, maybe 20 years ago, there was a terrible car crash where a pastor and his wife and 8 children were driving to an event somewhere, and they passed through Chicago and they were passing through Milwaukee, and they were involved in a terrible accident where they lost all of their children, and they were hounded by, the news media on why they weren't terribly stricken with grief and angst and everything. at the loss of their children. And, I still don't understand that kind of peace, but they were at peace and they said, yes, we loved our children, but we know God has them now. And I was a non-believer at the time. And I went, oh, come on, that's a cop out. God, don't did you even love these kids? But then as I grow in my faith, I understand that I'm leveling up and I'm understanding what's really important here. Well, tragedies and disasters, God doesn't make them happen, but they happen. Uh, it's spiritual warfare. It's trying to distract us from God's love. And I envision as I'm talking, I'm envisioning the universe. Um, and an asteroid, there's talk about this asteroid that's going to come close to our Earth in 2032, I guess. But picture asteroids passing through. You've got this beautiful, lovely, peaceful uh, solar system, all right? And all of a sudden, a meteor passes through and disrupts everything. Well, that's kind of not in harmony with the beautiful solar system, but it's a distraction. And it's meant to be there. It's a part of creation, but it's a distraction from the order of things, the natural order of things. So we have natural disasters and tragedies that are disrupting the natural order of things. And so that is natural, order is natural, and order is more profound and more prominent than disorder. I don't know that the earth is really, our planet is really an example of that right now. But when you rise above those tragedies and feel that sense of peace, you realize what's truly important. Living in the moment, living with Jesus, and striving to do better. Gosh, I hope that all makes sense for you. And we're at the end of our time today. Comments are appreciated, and, and throw our backs up against the wall and challenge us, because it reminds me of a story of these two. No, it was a group of pastors. I don't know how many, maybe three or four, on a flight, and the flight was being abducted, and abducted, no, hijacked. And the hijackers were concerned because this group of pastors, clergy, uh, weren't upset. And one of the hijackers said, "Why aren't you worried? Why aren't you upset? Well, aren't you afraid of dying?" And one of them said, "No, if you kill us now, we're just that getting to meet God that much sooner. We're much closer to God. And if you don't, um, and we fight and save everybody, we're still that much closer to God. We're doing the natural request to fight spiritual warfare." I hope that made sense. I probably messed that up too, but I'm a mess, right? And that's why I'm here to share my mess with you, so that I know you're in a mess somewhere, maybe we can work through it, and we're happy to help you with that. So, let's see. God has everything under control. And when you go into a tragedy and you settle in that peace and breathe Jesus in and blow Satan out, you begin to see just how much control he has. And you receive blessing after blessing after blessing. I was talking to a homeless person once, and I said, "How are you? You can't find a place to live. You're out here on the street. It's freezing in the middle of January." And he said, when prayers go up, blessings come down. And they do. And he says, to me, "You're a living example of that. You're a blessing to me." I thought I was doing a good thing, but maybe God was going, "Get out there and do something." And there's a song, is it by, man, I don't remember who it's by, but it's called Do Something, God, this, and the song's about this guy challenging God. Why don't you do something? God said, I did. I created you. So we all have that power to use Jesus's power. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. Thank you for joining us today. Challenge us, bite at us, snarl at us, whatever. Put them in the comments and we'll grow together. Okay. All right. I love you. Take care. Bye.